Hello, this is Vision Denial and Clearing Vision MSI 2022. My name is Sam, and if this is the first time you've joined us, hi. I've watched every playoff game from all 11 competing regions, yes, including that one. This is our series governing all the day-to-day business involving MSI so far. If you missed our video from yesterday, we did a podcast with Josh, Connor, and I regarding groups and how we thought it ended, what we expect from things. Some of us are going to be right, some of us are going to be wrong, as we cover the first day of the Rumble stage. Do get the chance to check it out if you can. It is a little bit lengthier than most of our other videos on this channel, so understandably, choose whatever section that you have the chance for. But otherwise, highlights. Connor was on the favor that G2 was going to be able to beat T1. Josh was of the idea that RNG were going to be able to do it. And I was of the favor that I don't think any of them are going to beat it, but if it's going to be some team, it's going to be the Buffaloes. Some of us were wrong. Some of us are right. We'll get right into it, not to just bruise my own ego. That said, again as a reminder, RNG players are playing remotely due to the lockdowns that were happening in Shanghai and the logistics that were involved with it. But otherwise, we've got 6 teams remaining. First day of the Rumble stage. Let's get to the first game of the day. Starting with the highlight match, Revenge of 2019. We've got the LCKs, T1 versus Europe's LECs, G2. The gods can bleed. As G2 take a simple composition, wait out the time to scale, and hope that T1 doesn't play perfect, and T1 not playing respectfully, attempt to play the same style that has helped them dominate all season in the group stage. And you know what? It just kind of fizzles for them. It really just kind of falls apart as they're trying to really juggle this very complicated composition against a team that isn't like their average competitor. It's not like the regular LCK group, which hasn't figured out a way to deal with them, not on a consistent basis, and it's not the group stage. G2 have a caliber to work with here. Now, T1 did hold a strong early game, making it very hard for G2 to navigate their composition, 5k behind. But as T1 seemed to avoid increasing the tempo for some reason, and the pressure, G2 decided to look for some engage avenues and found a lot of good ones, while having, especially with the draft that they had, a large amount of team fight advantages. Team 1 then attempted to outdo them in these fights, but this is where some of the disrespect comes in, as they usually do when it comes to the drafts. And, you know, it's another draft that they picked that doesn't team fight super well. And because they were able to do so against weaker teams, they thought this would work. But G2 is not a weaker team, not by any stretch. So let's take a look at the gold graph here real quick to show what I mean. So already you can see that T1 has a large lead going in. They end up having the largest lead across the game throughout throughout the entirety of the 40-minute game. And it becomes super clear that by the time the 27-minute mark goes through, the fact they have not ended the game and that a lot of avenues had been regained by G2 is not a super great sign for T1. And this is not a team that plays many late game scenarios. I do want to point out that G2 did find fantastic avenues in terms of being able to use their composition, which, even though niche setup, is very consistent and was really easy to execute, as well as easy to coordinate, especially with the kind of team that they are. So kudos on G2 for breaking first blood on T1. Next up, we've got North America's LCS, Evil Geniuses versus the LPL in China. Royal Never Give Up. Interesting to see these teams take a very similar approach, but slightly different compositions from game one. Evil Geniuses and Royal Never Give Up, being much slower teams in their own respect in terms of the early game, have given each other a lot of chances to gain the resources that they want. The difference here being that Royal Never Give Up, the Royals, were more efficient, and Evil Geniuses took too long to use the key concept of their draft's win conditions. Not to say that Evil Geniuses weren't looking for opportunities where possible. Many team fights and picks looked super excellent from their part. The issue comes when they are done with such when they are down with such a deficit, you risk losing more attempting them as a result. I'm fairly disappointed at the disjointed nature of the vision play by the Royals, allowing Evil Geniuses to maneuver the map more comfortably than the lead should have entailed. But otherwise, this was a fairly clean and calculated mid to late game from them, never really letting go of the control after the first 15 minutes of the game. Let's take a look at the gold graph from that. And like immediately you see here, there's some dips and dives in terms of like the slow progress, but you don't see any like great trajectory that really amps up until the 10-minute mark, and it doesn't really start taking into swing by the time the 15-minute mark comes around. Now these games are already showing to be slightly longer than the group stage, passing the 30-minute threshold on a regular basis, and this benefits mostly RNG. Now, Evil Geniuses, you'll see at 23-minute mark, got a Baron, and this really helped them regain some control of the map for a bit, but this was done off of excellent vision play that the Royals really needs to shore up. Seems to be a bit of a sore point for them at this current moment. With that, let's take a look at the next game, being we've got the PCS in Southeast Asia's Paris Saint-Germain Talons versus the Vietnamese VCS Saigon Buffaloes. And PSG are showing that they can play the early game, sure, but that their mid to late game is still fairly rough. At some point, it was super clear to me that the Talons didn't actually understand their win condition and were playing on expectations of how to approach each stage of the game. Heading with an 11K lead, only to lose it in 2 team fights, is wild to me. And honestly, should be super reevaluated before they play their next game or up until the next day even. The Saigon Buffaloes on their part knew how their composition worked and still overstepped super consistently. It's one thing to not know your draft condition and mess it up, and another to know exactly what your scaling points are, hit it, pull the trigger, and like just play suboptimally from it. Now, the Buffalo should be given credit as they knew exactly where those scaling points were and that they pulled the trigger to regain control when possible. It's just a shame for both of these teams that the game played out as it was. Like, the Talons caught the few mistakes out of Taki, and that's what got them to win. Not the 11K lead, the 2 catches from Taki that really did it. And the fact that the Buffaloes lost from those few catches on Taki is equally disappointed from a situation they clearly understood where their win conditions were. Just disappointing all around. Well, take a look at the gold graph to see what I mean here. And like, you see immediately at the exact moment where the goal just kind of drops and the difference between the 2 teams nears 1K at best. The fact that like near the end of the game with I believe it was a 5-for-1 fight on an extended engage from a pick on Taki is what ended the game and regained the Talons some of the lead. They had an 11K lead and lost 10K of it. This should have never been an option. They never ended the game on the first Baron, an option they could have easily been able to manage from it. They had literally sole point before ending the game. This is a large amount of scenarios that, for me, the Talons needs to reevaluate completely. And the Buffaloes, on their part, show great understanding of what their game play should be, but are not consistently hitting the mark, and it's super unfortunate. Let's take a look at the next game. We've got G2 versus Royal Never Give Up. G2 is making a statement today that they are the favorites of the tournament. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but the way they played today really cements their case for it. Fully controlling all stages of the game, incredible vision play from them, solid neutral setups, clear understanding of their win conditions. This was G2's, honestly, this was their cleanest game of the tournament by far. And not without contest, granted. The Royals do their best to create space and flanks well behind, but have shown that they don't have as strong of an understanding of the early game as previously presented. Part of that being, their early game weaknesses really shows against teams that contest them, solidly. And G2's contest in their early game at all points, making it super hard for the Royals to really set up any of their mid to late game plays. And they don't capitulate under the pressure either. The Royals rely so strongly on their opponents being weaker in the early game, or that they fumbled in the mid game, that they look super lost and disjointed in moments where that doesn't happen. And I'm wondering if they'll be able to handle other early game pressures as the tournament moves forward and teams get more comfortable with this new meta setup. Let's take a look at the gold graph to show what I mean here. And this is super wonky, right? RNG, the Royals are definitely getting more contest out of the situation. But notice that the Royals usually don't get their chances to flex their mid to late game prowess off situations like this, because they never get a lead of any substance whatsoever. G2 hold full control of almost every single neutral but 2. That's including 2 Barons and a whole lot of kills. And G2 fully understood exactly what kind of points that the Royals were really going to work for. And they still couldn't grab anything from it. Expecting way too many mistakes from G2 to come out will not really net you anything. And it's not something that you can expect from their largest competitors of the tournament. Let's take a look at the next game. We've got the Saigon Buffaloes versus Evil Geniuses. Now, Evil Geniuses holding out strong, incredibly strong use of map pressure and wave manipulation to always answer the aggression out of the Buffaloes. Saigon Buffaloes, for their part, attempt a number of dive attempts, but usually avoiding trying to get Hasmed ahead early enough, right, before really over-focusing for Shogun. There's a really weird set of priorities that the Buffaloes attempted, and it bit them in the butt. Overall, the Buffaloes felt super rushed this game, as if they knew that they had to create some fights or plays first, but without any of the resources or time, due to just how Evil Geniuses set up their lanes and vision. Evil Geniuses do play this game a little bit slow, opting to wait for the Buffaloes to create unforced errors and overstepped on certain engages. And for this game, it works out, but that could lead to some gnarly situations where if they didn't fumble, they would be on the back foot for the entire game. Evil Geniuses have incredible setup and solid vision, understanding exactly where they needed to be with some good wave manipulation. The issue here is that it doesn't look good when you win the game off of holding 0 tempo control. The pace of the game was solely on the Buffalo's control, and Evil Geniuses were just waiting for an opportunity to come back from it. Let's take a look at the gold graph from this here. And by all accounts, this looks super clean. They have one of the faster games of the day. It seems very efficient, but this mostly tells you a lot about how the Buffaloes were overstepping mostly and weren't creating a lot of a lot of proper setup or any opportunities for themselves to succeed. And a lot of it was the evil geniuses just waiting on them to come towards them. And by all account, this worked for this game. I'm just hoping that this is not the main strategy that evil geniuses employs going forward as they face up the rest of their opponents. And for the last game of the day, we've got PSG Talons versus T1. And this is a much calmer game out of T1, who seem to want to prove that they are still a force to be reckoned with. They opt not to play a high-tempo early game and instead approach the game with a demeanor to slowly suffocate their opponents and never let them grab any control of the map. The fighting itself is still scrappy, but never at any point do any of the positive trades and kills for the Talons lead to anything other than a reset for them, which is super not great for them, but not from a lack of trying. The Talons attempt many small skirmishes at key points of the game as to find other leads from it, but as they attempt to do so, T1 is grabbing 3 to 4 other things as an answer. It's good to see that T1 is changing demeanor, especially after the G2 game, as they'll need to take things a bit more seriously if they want to guarantee the title they've missed out in years. The Talons, for their part, look more and more like the regular season selves, but it's at a cost of an ability to adapt to a new meta, to play quickly and early. We'll see if they're able to handle the rest of their matchups with some of their warm-ups now done, but like this long for a warm-up, not great. Take a look at the goal graph here real quick. And by all means, this looks like a standard gold graph that from a T1 game, right? The early game, however, is significantly slower, where much of the gold lead that would be accrued, like the 6K lead that eventually spikes here, is off at the 17-minute mark instead of somewhere closer to the 10 to 13-minute mark. And by all accounts and purposes, this looks more like a standard game from any of the other 2 top teams right now that are contesting for the title. And to me, that's a good sign of T1 deciding to adapt to what the Rumble stage is starting to look like. For the Talons on their part, they do get some contest out of this, and they look good in terms of kills, but like I mentioned, not a lot of neutral objectives or resources of any kind being taken. Only one plate, only one Drake, nothing else. Really hard to contest anything at that particular kind of like pacing. So just to like reiterate in terms of like the change of meta itself. So what do I mean overall in terms of like a meta change? So first off, out of the Rumble stage, what a way to start it off, right? Immediately, just a banger. But as a kind of, I'm wiggling my eyes, kind of an overall view of things, all of the games were significantly longer, other than one of the games, I believe, holding up to be like 28 minutes from Evil Geniuses. The rest of the games were longer than 30 minutes, sometimes pushing 40 minutes, which is a far cry difference already from how the group stages played out in general, which to me indicates an idea of comfortability around what the actual, like, now that we understand a better sense of what the meta is, the flexibility that it brought in, as well as the ability to like not dunk on, but like flex as much as possible in terms of how we can approach the game, goes away. The pretenses of being able to really dominate a particular team to a scale that is just absurd. It is so ridiculous how quickly these games were in the group stage that we're coming to a sense of respect at this point. The 6 teams that have arrived are being respectful towards each other just a smidgens more. or at least consistently more. And I should expect, or at least I expect, I don't know about everybody else, but I do expect that as we go on, this is likely the kind of pace of the game that we should be seeing. And it's super interesting because the champions themselves haven't changed. There have been a couple of notable things that have been added on. There's been a lot more Callistas from the game so far, and I think that's just an indication of a stronger understanding of how to approach neutral objectives and extended fights, as well as just allowing Wukong to come out more often. The larger pickup on Diana with its combo with Yasuo, super interesting to me. But this is again just the day one of the Rumble stage. We're in the crest of a change in terms of the meta. And this happens on every international stage section. Group stage looks one way, Rumble stage will look another way, and then the best of fives will definitely look individually different on a case by case basis. And so I'm still super interested in the fact that we still have 100% pick ban rate for both Ahri and Lucian. This pair of champions still showing to be incredibly terrifying, it looks like, regardless of the win rate that's reflected on Ahri being just 50%. But it seems like Wukong is not slowing down in terms of having only been gone for 3 games. Only 3 of the 42 games of the tournament Wukong was not in. A lot of the bruiser junglers are here to stay. It's survivability, skirmishing, neutral controls. And because early game prowess focuses tremendously on turret objectives, like turrets themselves, laning objectives, and plates, that usually the only neutral that matters at that point is the Herald, which, by all accounts, the earlier the gold lead, the faster you take turrets, everything, so on and so forth. And with the larger focus now on bruiser junglers, means that games can last longer. The win conditions themselves really hinges less on can you get so much gold super early and then steamroll your way down, but more on now we are not given the opportunity to steamroll early. We should make sure to set up the foundation so that we can carry later into the game and contest neutral objectives that will allow us to have some sort of win condition from it. But that's off of just the game one the day one of Rumble stage adaptations at this current moment. A lot of these teams are no longer just facing off run-of-the-mill lower seeded teams. Totally understandable. A lot of these games are going to look drastically different. But how long are we going to expect this to just be a drastic difference between the 2 different stages, or the norm going forward? And I think tomorrow, if the draft tends to look similar and the game lengths tends to stay similar, I think that we've reached a point where the meta will inevitably change enough for the games to no longer be just one-sided snowball events. Or at least not so explicitly so. I do want to say, I was super wrong. Connor, my good sir, I do believe our stat man Connor, being the one to predict that G2 was going to take the game off of T1, hats off to you. Ding, ding, ding. But I don't expect T1 to lose any other game from this afterwards. It'd be a far cry from it. But gods do bleed. But are they vengeful? We'll get a chance to see. I want to hear what you guys have to think in the comments down below. Do you think that this is going to be the only loss for T1, or do you think other teams, having seen that it's possible, will be able to really push the envelope on what T1 can do? Do you think G2 is now considered the new favorites, or is this just the day one they've gotten the reins of being able to show, hey, we can totally beat them. We've got a chance. Any and all of your thoughts I would love to hear in the comments down below. If you're new to this kind of show and enjoy the content that you've seen here, leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate all of you who have watched so far, truly and deeply. We're in the second half of the tournament, and the light is at the end of the tunnel, but we're not quite there yet. So I'll see you all tomorrow for the Day 2 Rumble stage. Thank you for watching. See you next time.